Hey everyone, welcome to another scroll saw video. Today I'm going to do a tutorial on stack cutting. I'm going to be cutting 6 pieces of 1/8 inch Baltic birch plywood making Christmas ornaments. I saw this pattern floating around on some of the Facebook groups that I'm in within the last month or so, and I just thought it was too funny not to make and share. So right now I'm making about 72 pieces on 2 sets of stacks with 6 ornaments on each one. I'm going to show you pretty much everything except for the sanding and the cutting the blanks, because I think most of us are comfortable with cutting on a table saw and sanding, and this is a scroll saw channel. All right, hope you enjoy. So when you're stack cutting, one of the most important things you need to do is secure the pieces together. And there's a variety of ways you can do this. I've seen people use glue sticks, double-sided tape, pin nailing inside the waist areas. What I usually do is just tape it in one direction and then go over the other sides with more painter's tape. And if you pull this tight and get all the edges, it holds it fairly securely. And since my typical method of pattern application is blue painter's tape followed by 3M Super 77 spray adhesive on the back of the pattern, this just saves me some extra steps. This is just the way that I do it. I think it's important to experiment and find what is easy and works best for you, but I can tell you that this method does work. Anytime you're doing a fretwork style project, you're going to have to drill a lot of holes. I typically will use a moderate sized drill bit for any of the areas where I don't need to get inside a tight space so that it's easier to feed the blade. In this case I used a number 1 drill, which is a little bit smaller than a 1/4 inch, because it was about the exact size I needed for the hole on top. Anytime you're drilling, especially if you're drilling plywood, but in general it's good to have a backer. I'm using 1/8 inch masonite here, but I'll often put any type of scrap wood that I have available because it helps prevent tear out and chipping on the back whenever you're drilling the holes. This is especially important when you're using a standard twist drill bit. I feel like it works a little bit better. You get a little bit cleaner cut with the brad point bits, but I don't have brad point bits in as many sizes as I do standard twist bits. The smaller hole that I drilled here, I used I think it was a number 55. It fit pretty much just inside the perforation lines and the mask lines for the veining, so I think it was a pretty good fit. Probably the most important thing you can do when you're doing stack cutting to prepare outside of the actual cutting is to make sure that your blade is square to your table. There's, again, a variety of ways you can do this, but I think the easiest way is to take a relatively thick piece of wood. Here I've got some 1.5 by 1.5 poplar stock that I use for compound cutting, and I'm going to show you here. Let's make one cut. You can check it for square with a square, like I'm doing, and then also turn it over and go back into the same area with your blade. If you end up with something that's wider than the kerf of the blade, or if you see sort of a tapered or arrow type shape, then you need to adjust your table, and you can repeat this process until you get it to where the blade fits right back into the kerf. Now on to the actual cutting. So for this project I'm using a Pegas number 5 skip tooth reverse blade. As I mentioned in my previous video on using picking the right scroll saw blades, using a skip tooth blade is important when you get into thicker, whether it's stack cutting or thicker hardwoods, because you need to be able to clear the chips out to prevent burning and premature wear on the blade. When you're cutting this many pieces stacked together, we're about 3/4 of an inch thick. It's extremely important, as I mentioned earlier, that the blade is square, but also that you let the blade do the work. It's going to go slow, much slower than you're probably used to if you're cutting just plain 1/4 inch ply or hardwood. But if you push too hard, the blade is going to flex. You're going to get distortion in the cut pattern, and that distortion is going to cause significant problems. When you're working with fretwork on a project like this, if the bottom is beveled out or belled out wider than the top, or you have the reverse, then your pattern is it's not going to work. You may cut out bigger areas than you intended to. You may have smaller holes than you needed to, but ultimately it's just not going to give you the finished product that you wanted. When you're stack cutting, the goal is to save some time and to produce more of the same product, right? Make some copies. Or if you're cutting something very thin, you may want to stack cut anyway, just because cutting 1/8 inch wood is kind of a pain in the neck if you're cutting a single ply. Something you'll commonly hear from me is I tend to prefer to use flat blades over spiral blades unless there's no other alternative. And so you'll see me doing that here in many of the smaller areas outside of the basically what I would consider veining on the perforations in the mask lines. For these, for the first set, I used a number 3 spiral blade, and for the rest of them, I switched over to a number 20 because I felt that the larger kerf was kind of distorting the overall appearance of the pattern. So you're going to want to experiment and try to find out what works best for the project at hand. But another reason why I tend to use a flat blade over a spiral blade is I feel that the spiral blades bend and deflect more, and as I said earlier, that type of deflection can ruin the lower pieces of the fretwork. So you have to take it very slowly, just like with the flat blade, and let the blade do all of the work. If you find yourself pushing, you need to probably put a new blade on. You're going to go through blades a lot here. I found that for these ornaments I was able to use probably 1 blade per stack of ornaments. So 1 blade gets me 6 ornaments. You can go longer if you want, but it's going to take longer, and you're going to have to push harder because the blade's going to dull out. A final note, you'll probably see that I put a small hole next to the outside of the ornament. I like to do that because it keeps the outside frame of the stack intact. I don't have to cut through the frame to get to the ornament, so A, there's less time that the blade has to cut through irrelevant material, and B, you have a good handhold the entire time. You don't get any flexing or pieces coming apart because you have the outside skeleton of the stack intact to hold on to while you're cutting. Final note, I've had some feedback on the camera angles, so I've tried to be more mindful of that this time. If you have any feedback, feel free to share. I make these videos for fun and to share with all of you, my viewers and subscribers, but I want to make the best content that I can, so feel free to share feedback of any kind. So now we've gone through all the stack cutting, and you can see the finished product in a picture here. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've learned something. And if you have any ideas on something you'd like to see or learn more about next, send me a message or write a comment down below. Thanks. Have a great day.